Welcome back to Stories That Heal. Imagine stumbling upon someone in desperate need and realizing their story holds more secrets than you ever expected. That's what happened to Barron Trump in today's tale of courage, compassion, and danger. This gripping story proves that even the smallest acts of kindness can lead to extraordinary change. Don't miss it. The streets of Manhattan were alive with their usual symphony of chaos. Honking horns, hurried footsteps, and the occasional wail of a siren cutting through the crisp December air. The cold was unforgiving, seeping through even the thickest layers of clothing and biting at exposed skin. Among the crowd weaving through the towering buildings, a man stumbled, his knees buckling as he collapsed onto the icy pavement. James, clad in a tattered coat and shoes that barely held together, clutched his chest as he gasped for air. His face, pale and gaunt, reflected the toll of days without food and weeks of relentless struggle. Around him, people paused momentarily, their gazes flickering with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some pulled out their phones, capturing the scene, but no one stepped forward to help. The crowd quickly resumed its hurried pace, treating James as another invisible casualty of the city's relentless rhythm. A sleek black limousine rolled to a stop nearby, its tinted windows gleaming under the winter sun. From the back seat stepped Barron Trump, his tall frame and composed demeanor striking against the grimy backdrop of the city street. Known for his connection to wealth and power, Barron typically moved unnoticed through the chaos, his private world insulated from the struggles of everyday life. But today, something caught his attention. His sharp blue eyes locked onto James, sprawled helplessly on the ground, his trembling hand reaching out as if to grasp onto the last threads of hope. Barron hesitated for only a moment before striding toward the fallen man. His presence immediately drew whispers from the onlookers, who craned their necks to watch. Was he really going to stop? Would someone of his status actually care about a man like this? Kneeling beside James, Barron placed a steady hand on his shoulder. His voice, calm yet commanding, broke through the hum of the city. "Call 911!" he barked to his driver, who hurried to comply. James's cracked lips moved as he struggled to speak, barely audible over the din. "Help me," he whispered, his words laced with desperation. "You're going to be okay," Barron said firmly, his tone softening as he leaned closer. "I've got you." His words carried a sincerity that momentarily silenced the bustling street around them. The crowd, now lingering at a distance, watched with a mix of fascination and skepticism. Why would someone like Barron Trump, born into privilege and insulated from hardship, care about a man who had clearly lost everything? Within minutes, the wail of an approaching ambulance shattered the stillness. Paramedics quickly assessed James, their movements efficient as they loaded him onto a stretcher. As they prepared to wheel him away, a crumpled piece of paper slipped from James's pocket, fluttering to the ground. Barron's sharp eye caught the movement, and without hesitation, he picked it up. The paper was worn and folded multiple times, the writing scrawled in shaky, uneven letters. As Barron read the words, his heart tightened. "To anyone who finds this, I'm sorry. I failed. Please take care of my daughter, Mia." The name hung in the air, as if demanding action. Barron stood there for a moment, frozen in thought. The world around him seemed to fade, the noise of the city becoming distant. Who was Mia? Where was she? And why was her father leaving a note like this? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more urgent than the last. "Follow the ambulance," Barron instructed his driver, his voice steady but resolute. As the limousine eased into traffic, Barron gazed out the window, his expression uncharacteristically troubled. For years, the world had seen him as a symbol of privilege, a young man defined by his family's wealth and status. But in that moment, as he clutched James's note, none of it mattered. This wasn't about power or appearances. It was about doing the right thing. The hospital was a stark contrast to the chaos of the streets. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. Barron sat stiffly in the waiting room, ignoring the curious glances from nurses and patients who whispered among themselves. Despite the attention, he remained focused, the crumpled note still in his hand. When a doctor finally emerged, Barron rose instantly. "How is he?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. The doctor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, regarded him curiously before answering. "He's stable for now, but he's severely malnourished and suffering from exhaustion. Do you know him?" Barron hesitated, glancing at the note before shaking his head. "Not really, but I found this." He handed the paper to the doctor, who frowned as he read it. "His daughter," Barron explained. "Where is she?" The doctor's expression softened, but his reply was grim. "He hasn't mentioned her. We'll need to ask him when he's more alert." "Can I see him?" Barron pressed. After a moment's hesitation, the doctor nodded. The room was dimly lit, the steady beep of the heart monitor breaking the heavy silence. James lay motionless, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Barron approached the bed cautiously, the gravity of the situation weighing on him. He had seen suffering before, but never this close, never this personal. Suddenly, James stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, but then locking onto Barron. "Mia," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Where is she?" Barron leaned in, his voice gentle but firm. "She's safe," he lied, not knowing where she was but determined to find her. "I'll make sure of it." James's eyes filled with tears, his frail body trembling. "Promise me," he choked out, his desperation palpable. "Promise me you'll find her." "I promise," Barron said, the weight of those words settling heavily on his shoulders. As he left the hospital, Barron felt a growing sense of urgency. James's plea echoed in his mind, and the crumpled note in his pocket felt like a lifeline. He had no idea where this path would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away. Mia was out there somewhere, alone and vulnerable. And Barron was determined to find her, no matter what it took. What he didn't realize was that this choice would not only change his life, it would reveal secrets, spark danger, and test his courage in ways he could never have imagined. The cold December wind whipped against Barron as he stepped out of the hospital and into the streets of Manhattan. His mind raced, replaying James's desperate plea over and over. "Promise me you'll find her." Barron had promised, but the enormity of the task loomed large. He didn't know where to begin, but one thing was clear. Mia needed help, and he was her only hope. The note in his pocket was his only clue. Barron called his family's private investigator, a seasoned professional named Cole, and quickly explained the situation. "I need to find this man's address," Barron said, his voice clipped and resolute. "There's a little girl out there, and I don't know how much time we have." Within an hour, Cole had tracked down James's address. Barron's limousine rolled to a stop outside a dilapidated apartment building in one of the city's rougher neighborhoods. The windows of the building were dark, many of them cracked or boarded up, and the faint smell of garbage lingered in the icy air. Barron hesitated for a moment, then stepped out, determined not to let the bleakness of the scene deter him. Inside, the elevator groaned and shuddered as it carried him to the fourth floor. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering bulbs casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. As he approached James's apartment, he noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, there was no response. Then a small, timid voice called out from the other side. "Who is it?" Barron leaned closer to the door, softening his voice. "My name is Barron. I'm here to help." The door creaked open just a sliver, revealing a little girl no older than 6. Her wide, frightened eyes peeked out, and she clutched a stuffed rabbit with one torn ear. Her face was smudged with dirt, and her brown hair hung in messy strands. She looked at Barron warily, her small frame trembling slightly. "Are you Mia?" Barron asked gently. She nodded, but didn't say anything. Her lip quivered as she whispered, "Where's my daddy?" Barron crouched to her level, his heart breaking at the fear in her voice. "Your dad is in the hospital," he explained softly, "but he's going to be okay. He asked me to find you and make sure you're safe." Mia hesitated, clutching her rabbit tighter. Finally, she stepped aside, allowing Barron to enter. Inside, the apartment was as bleak as he had imagined. The air was cold, and there was little furniture, just a threadbare couch, a wobbly table, and a few mismatched chairs. In the kitchen, the cupboards hung open, revealing nearly empty shelves. A single loaf of bread sat on the counter, accompanied by a jar of peanut butter. Barron took it all in, swallowing hard. This wasn't just poverty, it was survival in its rawest form. "Do you have anyone else who takes care of you?" he asked, glancing back at Mia. She shook her head. "Just Daddy. He says we'll be okay as long as we stick together." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked down, as if ashamed of her circumstances. Barron's chest tightened. "Do you like pizza?" he asked, trying to shift the mood. Her eyes lit up for a brief moment, but then she quickly looked down again. "Daddy says we can't afford it," she murmured. "Well, today's different," Barron said with a small smile. "Today, you can have anything you want." For the first time, a faint smile crept across Mia's face. It was small and shy, but it was there. Barron felt a wave of determination wash over him. This little girl deserved so much more than what life had dealt her. They ordered pizza, and when it arrived, they sat on the floor to eat it. Mia giggled as Barron showed her how to fold a slice New York style, her laughter filling the apartment like a warm light cutting through the darkness. For a moment, the bleakness of the room melted away, replaced by the simple joy of a shared meal. After dinner, Barron tucked Mia into bed, pulling a thin blanket over her as she clutched her rabbit tightly. "Are you going to leave?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "No," Barron said firmly. "I'll be right here." She nodded and closed her eyes, her breathing gradually slowing as she drifted off to sleep. Barron watched her for a moment, his mind racing. This wasn't just about finding Mia and keeping her safe for a night. This was about giving her a chance at a better life. A life her father wanted for her, but couldn't provide on his own. As the night deepened, Barron sat on the worn-out couch, staring at the dim glow of a streetlight filtering through the curtains. He pulled out the note again, his fingers tracing the jagged edges of the paper. There was so much he didn't know, so many questions without answers. Who was James? What had brought him to this breaking point? And why had he been so desperate to leave this message behind? A sudden knock at the door jolted Barron from his thoughts. He rose cautiously, his pulse quickening. Opening the door just a crack, he found himself face to face with a man in a leather jacket, his face rough and shadowed under the dim hallway light. "Can I help you?" Barron asked, his tone steady but firm. The man smirked, his eyes cold. "I'm looking for James. He owes me." Barron's jaw tightened. "He's not here." The man stepped closer, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "Well, when you see him, tell him time's up. No more hiding." Barron's fists clenched, but he held his composure. "You're not welcome here," he said, his voice unwavering. The man chuckled darkly, stepping back. "Message delivered." He disappeared down the hallway, his boots echoing against the floor. Barron shut the door and locked it, his heart pounding. He turned to find Mia standing in the doorway of her bedroom, her eyes wide with fear. "Who was that?" she asked, clutching her rabbit. "No one important," Barron lied, forcing a smile. "You don't need to worry." But inside, he was anything but calm. Whoever that man was, he was a threat, not just to James, but to Mia as well. Barron knew he needed answers, and he needed them fast. James's note had led him to Mia, but it was clear there was much more to this story. As Barron sat back down, his resolve hardened. Whatever danger James had been running from, Barron wouldn't let it reach Mia. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it head on. For Mia, for James, and for the promise he had made. Morning came with an uneasy stillness. The faint sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the apartment, casting long shadows on the bare walls. Barron, seated on the couch, barely slept. His mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions and growing fears. Who was that man at the door? What kind of trouble had James gotten himself into? And, most importantly, how could he protect Mia from a danger that felt larger and closer with every passing moment? Mia woke up quietly, clutching her stuffed rabbit as she shuffled out of her room. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying the innocence of a child who didn't yet understand the full extent of her circumstances. Barron forced a reassuring smile. "Good morning, Mia. Did you sleep okay?" She nodded but glanced nervously at the door. "Was that man from last night going to hurt us?" Barron crouched down to her level, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "No, Mia. I won't let anyone hurt you, I promise. You're safe with me." Her small nod betrayed the lingering fear in her eyes, but she seemed to trust him. Trust, Barron realized, was a responsibility he couldn't afford to break. He had promised James, and now he was promising Mia. He had to deliver. Later that morning, Barron made a call to his private investigator, Cole. "I need to know everything about James," Barron said firmly. "Who he was, what he's running from, and why someone would come looking for him." Cole hesitated. "Barron, digging into someone's life like this, it could lead to some places you might not want to go." "Do it anyway," Barron replied. "I don't care how messy it is. Just find out the truth." Hours later, Cole returned with findings that sent a chill down Barron's spine. James wasn't just an ordinary man down on his luck. He was a former contractor for a private military operation overseas. Years ago, he had uncovered corruption within his unit, implicating powerful individuals in illegal activities. When he tried to expose it, his own team turned on him, framing him as a liability and cutting him loose. The betrayal destroyed James's life, leaving him to fend for himself while powerful enemies watched and waited. "This isn't just about debt collectors or random threats," Cole said gravely. "The man who showed up at the apartment last night, he's connected to the people James crossed. And if they're after him, Mia could be a target too." Barron felt his chest tighten. The situation was far worse than he had imagined. This wasn't just about protecting Mia from neglect or poverty. This was about shielding her from people who wouldn't think twice about hurting a child to get what they wanted. "Is there anything James has that they might want?" Barron asked. Cole paused. "There's one thing. I found a reference to a flash drive James kept. It's supposed to have all the evidence he collected against these people. If that's still out there, it's the key to everything, but it's also a bullseye." Barron didn't have to think twice. "I'll find it." Back at the apartment, Barron searched every corner while Mia colored quietly at the kitchen table. He didn't want her to know what he was looking for, so he tried to keep things light. "Hey, Mia," he said, crouching beside her. "Do you know if your dad had any special hiding places? Maybe somewhere he kept important things?" She frowned, her little brows furrowing in thought. "He had a box," she said finally. "He told me never to open it." "Do you know where it is?" Barron asked gently. Mia nodded and pointed to a loose floorboard near the couch. Barron pried it up and found a small metal box tucked inside. He opened it carefully, revealing a flash drive along with a few photographs. One was of a much younger James, smiling with a group of men in military uniforms. Another was of James holding a baby Mia in his arms, his face beaming with pride. Barron's heart ached as he looked at the photos. This was a man who had once had a full, happy life, a man who had lost everything trying to do the right thing. He pocketed the flash drive and turned to Mia. "Thank you, Mia. You've been a big help." "Is that going to help Daddy?" she asked, her big brown eyes full of hope. "I think it will." Barron said with a nod. But we need to be very careful, okay? That evening, Barron packed a bag with Mia's belongings and called his driver. We need to get out of here, he said. Take us to the family cabin. The cabin, nestled deep in the woods just outside the city, was rarely used and offered the privacy they needed. Mia sat quietly in the back seat during the drive, clutching her rabbit and staring out the window. Are we running away? She asked suddenly. Barron glanced at her through the rearview mirror. We're staying safe, he said. It's like a little adventure. Mia nodded, but Barron could see the uncertainty lingering in her expression. The cabin was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, bare apartment they had left behind. Barron showed Mia to her room, which had a cozy bed and a small shelf of books and toys he had arranged for her. She smiled shyly as she explored the space, and Barron felt a flicker of relief. At least for now, she seemed happy. But as night fell, Barron's unease grew. He sat by the window, staring out into the dark woods. Every rustle of the wind, every shadow seemed to carry a threat. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. The message was from an unknown number. We know where you are. Hand over the flash drive, or you'll regret it. Barron's stomach churned. They had found him. The next morning, Barron returned to the hospital to visit James. He wanted to tell him Mia was safe and ask about the flash drive. But as he entered James's room, he froze. A woman in a dark coat was standing beside James's bed, speaking softly to the unconscious man. She turned sharply when she heard Barron enter. "Who are you?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. "I could ask you the same thing," Barron replied, his tone cautious but firm. "I'm a social worker," the woman said. "I've been assigned to his case." Barron felt a wave of relief, but kept his guard up. "I'm here for Mia. She's with me now." The woman raised an eyebrow. "With you? And who exactly are you?" "Someone who cares," Barron said firmly. "Mia's safe, and that's all you need to know." The woman studied him for a moment before sighing. "If you're going to keep her safe, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Her father isn't just some struggling single dad. He's in serious danger. And now, so are you." Barron clenched his fists. He already knew the danger, but hearing it confirmed made his resolve even stronger. He wasn't just protecting Mia anymore. He was stepping into a fight that could destroy them all. As he left the hospital, flash drive in hand, Barron realized the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. This wasn't just about kindness or compassion. It was about survival, and he was ready to fight for Mia, no matter what it cost. The drive back to the secluded cabin was tense. Barron sat in the back seat of the limousine, staring out at the winding road through the dense forest. Mia was fast asleep beside him, her small hand clutching his arm, her rabbit tucked securely under her chin. Barron's thoughts raced as he considered the flash drive in his pocket, a small, unassuming object that held the potential to expose corruption, destroy lives, and save Mia and her father. As the cabin came into view, Barron's phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "We're closer than you think. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Barron's grip on the phone tightened. Whoever these people were, they weren't bluffing. He glanced at Mia, her peaceful face a stark contrast to the chaos brewing around them. Protecting her wasn't just a promise anymore. It was his purpose. That night, Barron stayed awake, reviewing the contents of the flash drive on his laptop. The files were detailed and damning. Reports, photographs, and videos documenting the illegal activities James had uncovered during his time as a contractor. The evidence implicated several high-ranking officials and private entities, all of whom had profited from corruption and human suffering. Barron knew releasing the information would be dangerous, but it was the only way to end the threat against James and Mia. He reached out to his family's trusted legal advisor, who agreed to coordinate with a team of investigative journalists. The information would be sent to secure channels, ensuring that the story would break wide open and the perpetrators couldn't hide. To the window, peering into the darkness. Shadows shifted among the trees, and then he saw them, figures moving toward the cabin. Barron didn't panic. Instead, he acted swiftly. He went to Mia's room and gently woke her, crouching to meet her wide, sleepy eyes. "Mia," he whispered, "we're going to play a game. It's called hide and seek. Remember the secret spot in the closet we found?" She nodded, clutching her rabbit tightly. "Am I hiding now?" "Yes," Barron said firmly, his voice calm despite the fear coursing through him. "You have to stay very quiet and very still. Don't come out until I tell you, okay?" Mia nodded again, her trust in him absolute. He guided her to the closet, covering her with blankets to conceal her small frame. "You're going to win this game," he whispered, brushing a hand over her hair before closing the door. As the sounds outside grew louder, Barron positioned himself near the front door, grabbing a heavy fireplace poker for protection. The pounding on the door came next, loud and relentless. "Open up, Trump!" a gruff voice called from the other side. "We know you're in there, and we know you have the files. Hand them over, and this doesn't have to get messy." Barron took a deep breath, steadying himself. He opened the door just enough to see 3 men standing there, their faces shadowed in the dim porch light. "What do you want?" Barron asked, his voice calm but firm. "The files," the man in the center growled. "Give them to us, and we'll leave." Barron shook his head. "I don't have them anymore," he said, lying with conviction. "They've already been sent out. It's over." The man's expression darkened. Wrong answer. He shoved the door open, forcing his way inside as the others followed. Barron swung the poker, catching one of them off guard and knocking him to the ground. The second lunged at Barron, but he dodged, using his height and strength to shove the man into a side table, shattering it. The third man spotted Mia's backpack on the floor and sneered. "The girl's here," he called to the others. "No, she's not," Barron shouted, throwing himself at the man. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, Barron using every ounce of strength to hold him back. The man fought fiercely, landing a punch that sent Barron reeling, but Barron refused to give up. This wasn't just about him, it was about Mia. Suddenly, headlights swept through the windows, followed by the blaring sound of a horn. The men froze as a car screeched to a stop outside. Moments later, voices shouted commands. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them!" Barron's investigator, Cole, had arrived with local law enforcement in tow. The men hesitated, then slowly raised their hands in surrender as officers stormed into the cabin. Barron slumped against the wall, breathing heavily as the adrenaline began to fade. It was over, for now. Once the men were in custody, Barron hurried to the closet, opening the door to find Mia curled up with her rabbit. "It's okay," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "You're safe now." Mia clung to him, her small body trembling. "I was so scared," she sobbed. "I know," Barron said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'll never let anything happen to you." The next morning, Barron received a call from the hospital. James had woken up. Barron wasted no time, taking Mia with him to see her father. As they entered the room, James's eyes filled with tears. "Mia," he croaked, his voice weak but filled with love. "Daddy!" Mia cried, running to his bedside and wrapping her arms around him. James held her tightly, his frail body trembling with emotion. Barron stood back, his heart swelling as he watched their reunion. James looked up at him, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said hoarsely. "You saved her. You saved us." "You don't need to thank me," Barron said. "Just focus on getting better." Over the next few weeks, the story broke across the nation. The files Barron had shared exposed a web of corruption, sparking investigations and bringing powerful people to justice. James's condition improved steadily, and he began working with counselors to rebuild his life. Barron stayed involved, visiting often to check on Mia and James. He made sure they had everything they needed, from financial support to a safe place to live. Mia, now back in school, thrived under the newfound stability, her laughter filling the air whenever Barron visited. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table in their new apartment, Mia handed Barron a drawing. It showed the three of them, James, Mia, and Barron, standing under a bright sun, holding hands. "You're our hero," she said, smiling brightly. Barron's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the picture. "No, Mia," he said softly. "You're the hero." As he left that night, Barron felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He had stepped into a storm, not knowing how it would end, but he had emerged stronger, more determined, and deeply changed. Sometimes, the smallest acts of compassion could ignite the most extraordinary journeys, and this was one he would never forget. Thank you for watching Stories That Heal. Today's story reminds us of the incredible power of compassion and courage. Barron Trump's actions didn't just save a father and daughter, they sparked hope and change in ways no one could have imagined. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales that show the ripple effect of kindness.